Let me just say a word or two about Alan. Dr. Alan Warr is our former chair of this group, as of the AGM last week. And he is indeed a practicing IT transformation consultant, 2 decades of experience in IT and business consulting, doctoral research in terms of strategic management of IT, which kind of was a foundation to much of his consultancy work. He's worked with large organisations like BT, Bupa, KPMG, Capita, and the NHS. So, Alan, you ready to go?
Yes, thank you, Simon. Can you all hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, the next topic that we've addressed this evening is getting decisions made and delivered. And what I am proposing to do, get the slides forward, is really just to share with you some thoughts around that in the context of consulting. So just some basic stuff really on how do we really make decisions? How rational are we? And kind of why is it so difficult for organizations to make decisions? And then kind of playing in the consultants, because don't we get involved so often in the big decisions of organizations and the government sector? Well, why is that? What is it that we are doing to achieve for that to come about? Especially when we come under so much criticism, as we have done today from Parliament. And then some thoughts upon, well, actually, what I notice is that when we are involved, we do it pretty well. And the combination of consultants working with managers is often quite effective at getting decisions made and delivered. So what kind of tricks of the trade have I noticed over the years that we are using to achieve that? So that's the broad agenda today. And Simon introduced me. And I thought we'd start off with a little poll. We can get the polls to work. So first of all, a question. With luck, you will see a question on your screen. Could you just respond to that now? So how effective is your professional decision making? 0 to 10. Only a bit of fun, nothing scientific. Well, I'm not seeing a lot on the low end, and there's a few. But we're a modest group, there's not a lot on the high end either. We're all just above average. There's a kind of interesting distribution emerging. I think we've probably all voted now, and broadly we are round about, or the most common area is 6, 7, 8. We're all seeing ourselves as actually reasonably effective, is my interpretation of that. Okay, a second poll. Thinking about your organizations, or organizations that you've recently worked for, how effective are they at decision making? 0 to 10. Again, a piece of fun, nothing particularly scientific. Okay, someone has got the dreaded 1. Results are flowing in. No one's not a lot of takers for the 8, 9, 10 area for our organisations. That would be true of the organisations I work with too and work for. Just a few more seconds on this poll. And I think we can see that we're a little bit less scoring for the organisations that we work with or work for than for our own decision making. And that is exactly what I would have done, exactly what I would have expected. And there's probably very good reasons for that as well. Organisational decision making is often quite complicated. I think for me that's really quite interesting. It is just fun. It's nothing vaguely scientific, but it kind of shows that I probably think I'm quite good at decision making. In truth, most of the decisions I make are really quite simple. My organisations I find less so. I think I'm quite good at decision making. My organisations, I sometimes struggle to understand them a bit more, and when it comes to government decision making, again, I struggle even more still. I think that's being reflected in what is coming back here. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's just quickly think about how we make decisions. Of course, we're rational human beings, aren't we? But I learned very early on that decision making isn't as simple as it seems. I got a sweet tooth. I had a sweet tooth when I was a child, and I quickly learned that decisions aren't always just simple right or wrong answers. Sometimes the right answer for me is not necessarily the right answer for my parents. And underpinning most of the organizational life through since the Industrial Revolution has been this idea of rational human beings motivated by various rewards, money, status, and so on, making rational decisions. But is that really what happens? Well, certainly in the 20th century, as management consultancy and management decision making began to be formulated, that was the starting point. Gurus like Peter Drucker defined rational decision making as the way that managers should make decisions. It should be about defining the problems, analysing them with a lot of rigour, developing alternative solutions, ideally all alternatives, analysing and finding the best solutions and implementing them. But it isn't that simple, really. And although Peter Drucker recognised that it's more difficult for complex problems, others came in and found that actually we don't really make decisions like that at all, others, individuals or in organisations, that actually we struggle, particularly with complex problems, to be able to bring the information together and to generate the solutions. And in fact, what we tend to do is to do something called bounded rationality. We look at some of the information and we bound the amount of information, the amount of options that we look at, and come to a satisfactory outcome rather than an optimal outcome called satisficing. And as the 20th century continued, behavioral economists emerged and showed that actually psychology plays a huge role in decision making. I've kind of highlighted Daniel Kahneman, who got a Nobel Prize for prospect theory. Interestingly, prospect theory shows that we are twice as influenced by the prospects of a loss than we are by the prospects of gain. And so, and that just deflects us away from that purest rational decision making that we'd all like to be going for. We all sometimes think that we're going for. And our own Carol Osterweiler, who has talked here, has pointed out that neuroscience has advanced dramatically, and we now understand how the brain, increasingly understand how the brain really works, and how easy it is for the brain to malfunction, particularly under stress, where the fight-flight mechanism comes in. We often see this on projects where people trying to behave rationally, but the emotions kick in, the fight-flight mechanism kicks in, and we have to work hard to understand that. But that just drags us all away from that purest approach of rational decision making. We're not as rational as we would like to be. And then as you progress up through your consulting career or your management career, and you get to walk the executive corridor, you get more and more enmeshed in power and politics. Power plays a huge role in organizations and in our lives, in how, who gets listened to, who makes the decisions, and how those decisions are influenced. And I found in my doctoral research that politics is a real problem for IT departments. We tend not to be that good at it. It's a simple truth, and we get out politicized in the decision-making process. So the goal is definitely to be, decision-making is to be rigorous, to be rational, and to get to an optimal solution. But there's an awful lot that takes us away. And when it comes to organizational decision-making, there's a whole raft of complexity that kicks in. As well as the complexity, we've got the evolutionary psychologists who point out that actually we are still Stone Age creatures. Evolution hasn't moved us forward. And you can see this around organizations, the tribes that are battling it out for decision supremacy. There's often a massive difference between the IT department's culture and where they operate and the rest of the business. And then the misalignments in decision-making kick in and are quite legendary. A positive, but also challenging area is the sheer volume of data that's coming along. Huge amounts of data are now being generated and can be brought to bear in decision making, but it can easily overload us. We've got some incredibly complex and sophisticated techniques from data science, machine learning, deep learning, etc., beginning to be developed and played into this to make it even more complex in our organizational decision making as we use this data to drive insights. And that leaves and also in organizational life, we often find that it's actually quite difficult with some of the problems to identify what the optimal solution is. So we think about, is it COP26 coming up in Glasgow? A really major problem being addressed by the world, which doesn't have an optimal solution, and it doesn't easily yield itself to that kind of rational decision-making ideal that Drucker and others have been advocating. And so, in a sense, that kind of gives us a clue as to why consultants get drawn into this. There's a whole stack of things that we bring to bear when organizations are trying to make decisions. And indeed, many of the big consultancies, big strategy houses are engaged in preparing for, in helping those that are going to be at COP26 to prepare for it. I will just skip over that slide if that's okay. And one of the reasons why we get drawn is because we can help organizations to get their decision making more accurate and more rational because we're coming in from outside. It's called the outsider's advantage. We can see the situation afresh. We are often very independent in the way that we think, and we can bring insights and expertise in from our consultancies and from other sectors. And importantly also, we can actually say things that insiders dare not. At the end of the consulting assignment, at the end of the decision-making cycle, we can go on to the next assignment. For those inside the organization, if they have trodden on toes or said things that are inappropriate, they have to live with that into future decisions. So the outsider's advantage is really quite important. We're also able to deploy capacity, and this is oftentimes people don't see decisions coming. They have to be done in the moment. And an example was the pandemic, and NHS Test and Trace, the consultancies in the UK played a huge role in and is being judged at this time. Not always positive, but I was involved because I'm a healthcare consultant, or healthcare industry consultant in this, and I can remember at the time that there wasn't a lot of time available to get things up and running. And where else does a senior executive team or government department look to get an army of smart talent to get these things going? And so, not surprisingly, they do turn to the consultancies. There's a role in spreading innovation. Indeed, consultancies have often been the creators of new innovation, but they are definitely spreaders of innovation. When an organization this decision is basically about innovation, then they can't turn to their own track record and their own experiences, and turning outside is a very good possibility. Ed Schein, who was a professor at MIT and has written quite a few milestone books on consultancy, points out that actually expert consultancy is not the whole deal. Consultancies also bring processes for solving problems into organizations. Consultants have the privilege of doing lots of this work and develop processes which are for both general decision-making and specific decisions, and that can really be helpful to an organization. So for those kinds of reasons, consultancies can make a really big impact and do make a big impact working with organizations in that decision-making style. And we are now beginning to see a new stream, which I kind of highlight, which is KPMG have established a centre for data sciences, machine learning, AI. I think it's in Atlanta. And most of the consultancies are developing centres of excellence in this area. I mentioned the explosion of data, and this is going to turn out, this is going to be incredibly useful for decision making. And because it just allows huge amounts of data to be analysed, to be represented, and to gain insights into as inputs into decision making, and to take decision making to a new level. But it really is at this point a very demanding area. Myself, others, Google, are trying to make it a lot simpler so that we can all get involved in it more easily. But at the moment, it's a province of quite high level STEM skills. But we are going to see consultancies undoubtedly play a bigger and bigger role in decision, or a bigger role in decision making as they develop these data science skills and make them available to corporations and government. So if we get dragged in, drawn in, commissioned all of the time, what is it that we do that is so great? Well, I'm going to highlight a few things which we do to get the decisions across the line. The first is fairly obvious, and I've alluded to, and that is that consultancies and consultants bring evidence-based management. We work really, really hard in those rooms with all those post-it notes to bring a lot more evidence into play than is typically the case in most organizations' decision making. In a sense, we are increasing the rationality. We're expanding that bounded rationality concept from Herbert Simons. And in that way, we help organizations working with their managers, it's always their decision to get to a better decision through increased rationality. There's a key in our title. We are consulting. We're not managing, we're not dictating, we're not browbeating, we're consulting. And one of the tricks of the trade is that we do a lot of talking when we arrive. At least that joke that we borrow people's watch to tell them the time, which is, but it's absolutely key to what we do. By going in and engaging widely with people, and on some of the things I've done, I've engaged with several hundred people in an organisation on decision making. We certainly do get the time from people's watches, but we're also bringing them into the decision making. We're creating engagement, and that's reducing the resistance, the fight or flight mechanism kicking in, and is an incredibly powerful way. And because we're independent, we seem to be able to wander around organisations in a way which, across the various tribes, in a way which internal managers struggle a little to do. And I can't talk without mentioning the McKinsey-esque slide decks that we use. We get ribbed for this. We used to, anyway. I haven't actually been ribbed recently. These are incredibly important things that we bring together. We have a way, when we're engaged within organizations, of bringing the analysis and the recommendations together in these slide decks. There's a lot of skill involved in these slide decks, and a lot of effort goes into them. I've spent a fair proportion of my life doing this, but they allow that understanding to be shared and scrutinized with great efficiency. It was really interesting, I thought, to see Professor Whitty in the pandemic using those slide decks to really good effect, and becoming a bit of a celebrity with his catchphrase, "Next slide, please." But they are one of the secrets and of how we get things done. I would also point out, this isn't unique to consultancy, but I was certainly taught heavily that we have to syndicate decisions. So we oftentimes we think we're going to present our brilliance to a meeting, a recommendation is going to be made, and a decision will follow. But actually, what really happens if you're a really smart consultant is that you have walked the slide deck, the reports around the key decision makers well ahead of the key meeting. And it's important for powerful people not to have surprises, particularly in the meeting. And so in that way, the decision becomes a lot simpler. Resistance or problems and politics are surfaced early ahead of the meeting. And the meeting sometimes is just a kind of discussion amongst people who have already kind of understand what is going on, have already agreed their position on it. And finally, I kind of make a couple of points, one of which is actually from our assignment here. One of the keys to consultancy is that we put the client first. It's one of our mantras. And so we are influencers without authority in decision-making when they bring us in. Sometimes, regrettably, we do get to get heavily involved in decisions, but really we should be facilitating the client to make the decisions. And I learned quite early on from a senior partner at PA that actually it's a really cool thing not to give the client a single decision to make. In fact, a very cool technique, which I've used a lot, it's not original to me, is actually to make sure that there is a range of recommendations being put forward about a decision, or range of insights perhaps, which are at different levels of risk appetite, so that one is lower risk and easier to do, another is higher risk with potentially higher rewards, and something in the middle, to allow the client to kind of find the client organisation to find where they want to position themselves, rather than the consultant telling them where they should position themselves. And indeed, what I generally find is that given that position, the clients will often come up with another slight change on one of those areas, and in that way signal that that it is their decision and that they have shaped what the consultants have brought forward. From Simon, I also got the reminder that actually it's sometimes you can't actually get to the decision point that you would like to get to. But sometimes you have to think about, well, if we can't get to a decision, we've syndicated it and we can't get to a decision, we've done all the analysis and we can't get to the decision we think the organisation makes, it is really important, nevertheless, to move things forward. Momentum is really important. Obama talks about the arc of history, that things don't always go from A to B in a straight line. Sometimes you have to go via C, D, and E to get to the outcome that you want. And sometimes you can only get to a decision in principle, but that's fine. That's moved things forward. Sometimes you may have to accept a deflection and then. So I think what is important is from that is that consultants aren't gods. Working with managers, we don't always get to where we want to be. But a great skill, I think, is to keep things moving forwards. Okay, so that's kind of some thoughts really from me as a practicing consultant on decision making. We're not as rational as we think we are. Organisations, we kind of mark them down a little bit in our poll, but organisational decision making is complex and it's getting more complex. And some of the roles that consultants play, we come under a scrutiny, and today we have come under a bit of critique. But actually, there are very good reasons why people bring us in, and when we do get in and work with organisations to support their decision making, we are remarkably effective, which is why they keep bringing us in. Okay, well, I hope that was useful. What I would like to do now is to kind of throw it open for discussion. I'd be particularly interested to hear what you would add to that, or what you would disagree with. By all means, disagree with me.
So thank you, Alan. I think as before, if anybody wants to turn their camera on and talk to us, go for it. In the meantime, I'd just like, based on Alan's wisdom and advice there, in chat, just write the word love or hate, whether you think PowerPoint is the answer. Anybody want to respond maybe with a more serious point?
And that might include some stories from your own practice. Okay, I've left them stunned, Simon.
At the moment, I'm only seeing a lot of love, Alan. So
it might be my radical, my unusual position on PowerPoint slide deck. But I think we can move on to Jackie now. If you like, so.